Well, welcome. Tonight we're going to talk to somebody who works hard in the background. You don't see a lot of the results till they happen. It's like all of a sudden our town meeting's coming up, and we got 2 earmarks to help us defray costs. So welcome. I shouldn't say welcome. You're in Milford all the time anyway.
Thank you, Al. It's great to be back with you.
If there is somebody out here who doesn't know you, why don't you start with an introduction?
I'd be happy to. I am State Senator Becca Rausch. I was first elected to the Senate in 2018. I am now in the middle of my 3rd term, which is amazing to me. Nearly half a decade, not nearly, actually half a decade, serving in the Senate, serving our families and our communities and our workers, and partnering with our friends in local government and our colleagues in the federal government to make all sorts of good stuff happen. So I'm not new to the Senate. Milford is, of course, new to my district as of this term. So I'm very honored to represent the town of Milford and 10 other municipalities ranging east and north of here. I currently serve as the Senate Chair of the Joint Committee on the Environment and Natural Resources, the Senate Vice Chair of the Joint Committee on Children, Families, and Persons with Disabilities, the Vice Chair of the Senate Committee on the Census, and I sit on 4 additional committees on top of those 3 in which I have leadership roles. I am also on the board of the Women's Caucus and the board of the National Association of Jewish Legislators. I am the first woman and the first Jewish person to serve many of our district's communities in the Senate. And I am currently the only mother of children under 10 in the entirety of our state Senate.
Besides all of that, you got that side job called being a good mother.
Yeah, being a parent. Yep. My family and I live in Needham with our new to the family gigantic puppy, who is a giant breed called a Leonberger, and she is that's
a big dog.
Yeah, she's a really big dog, and she's just a giant lump of love, and we are so happy to have her.
My daughter, I always wanted a dog.
Yeah.
My daughters kept getting us little quarter hounders, no cheese, 12-pound Bichons. When she got married, her husband had a English Mastiff.
Oh, that is a different size dog.
That's 125 pounds. And Riley thought she was a lap dog.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with the gentle giants is they just love snuggles.
The funniest part was I'd go to bed, Riley would run up, and once 125 pounds of dog lays down, nothing's moving.
Yeah, you can't move him.
But in the middle of the night, we'd wake up with a loud thump, and then words that usually don't come out of my darling bride's mouth, because Riley would stretch her legs and push her right off the side of the bed.
Oh, yeah, we don't let our dog on the bed. That is we learned that with our first dog, who unfortunately passed away earlier this year. She was wonderful. She was a golden doodle, so she was, they're actually about the same height. But
that's an 80-pound dog.
Yeah, she was about 65 pounds,
yeah.
But there clearly wasn't enough room for everybody
on
a queen-size bed.
Not letting her into the room.
Oh, how'd that go?
A very large dog can make very large whiny noises.
Yes.
All night until we finally opened the door.
And let her in.
She would let me get into bed, get everything tucked, then she'd jump in. Because otherwise, I was dead.
It's a whole adventure. Anyway, so
how
we are
we
dog
doing
people.
As a state?
Overall, we're doing okay. We've passed some really important legislation over the last several years. We've, of course, have a newly as of last year, elected governor, who's the first woman, first LGBTQ person elected governor in the Commonwealth. Huge step forward from a justice and equity perspective in particular. And she's been working so hard, to keep us going on a good path. Our revenue numbers are a little bit down, but we, in the legislature, with particular credit to the chairs of the respective Ways and Means Committee, both in the Senate and the House side, have done a really, really important body of work over the last several years, building up our rainy day fund. So, we're in a decent spot, and I think from a district perspective, I think we're in a really great spot.
Well, you've done well by us because our Chapter 70 money, our school money, went up $7 million.
Yes, Milford got a huge chunk of money under Chapter 70 this year. In fact, when I was just here last month doing the first of my town hall series. So we've been doing town halls in various portions of the district, all the different regions, because it's a big district, so we want people to have to drive too far. But the first one was right here in Milford, and those numbers are very high. So I'm glad that we are able, from a state perspective, to continue supporting our
I
municipalities
had to draw a breath when the school committee came to us and said, we're going to need $6 million incremental dollars this year.
Mm-hmm.
It was like, gulp. Now, we've had years like this year, we have 16th straight year of surplus in Milford.
Yeah.
And we declared $8-some million in surplus.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not every year.
Of course.
Normally, we're still $2-3 million a year.
Yeah.
We take pride in, we don't use words that are less than, how would one say, less than proper, like 2.5 override or debt exclusion.
Yeah, Milford is in a lucky spot that they're not having that conversation. You're not having that conversation here. There's certainly other communities in my district who are having that conversation, and it's always a tough conversation. But we're not the federal government. State and local governments have to balance a budget. Yeah, we can't print it, and we can't operate at a deficit. So, so we have to make the numbers work every year.
And don't get me wrong. I mean, Beacon Hill saved us the last 2 years.
Yeah.
By getting that extra $6 to $7 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the rollout of the Student Opportunity Act. It's a bill I voted yes on my very first term. And it has, drastically changed the way, in a really positive way, the way that we provide education funding throughout the state.
Well, it's key because when you think about it, our high school was first opened in 74.
Mm-hmm.
Because we were the first, I was in the first class out of there.
Wow.
222 kids.
Yep.
40 years later, we got 260.
Mm-hmm.
So I always got to push back on the superintendent saying, one incremental child per year. How come you need all this space? But now...
Kids need a lot of space.
The last 2 years, it's been over 200 incremental kids.
Yeah, it's our school, the school population is sizable. And also, I sit on the education committee this term, and it is important, and we continue to focus and work on improvements for K-12 education, and continue to partner with the superintendents and principals and our partners in local government. There's also a really significant focus on early education, which in Massachusetts is the most expensive in the entire country. That is wildly unaffordable for many, many people throughout our district and throughout the Commonwealth at large. So especially as the only mom of kids under 10 in the Senate, making sure that we have affordable childcare, accessible childcare is really, really important to me. And actually, as we sit here and have this conversation, there's going to be a hearing on that, on the matter of childcare through the Education Committee, I believe tomorrow. As at the time of this recording. But it's a long-standing issue. The Senate actually passed legislation to make childcare more affordable and accessible last term. Unfortunately, that did not get all the way over the legislative finish line, so it's not law yet. So we continue to have this conversation on Beacon Hill, but we've also put in a significant amount of funding in the budget, and also the tax bill that we just passed and the governor signed into law provides some significant relief for families with young dependent children.
What can you do? I mean, when I think of the cost of daycare,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you've got to be making middle management and above just to survive it.
Yeah, it's the cost of a mortgage. It is the cost of a mortgage. And not even a huge mortgage.
Yes.
It's
and the mortgages are going up too. So
they are. Life in Massachusetts is expensive, and so it's something I'm aware of both personally and professionally. Right, we have young kids too. We're not so far out of those daycare bills, and frankly, even once you're in the public school, if you have after school care and other things, sports and whatnot, they all cost.
what can you do from a legislative point of view?
Yeah, so one of the things that we did was to direct a pretty significant amount of money in the budget to supporting center-based childcare and improving those rates and providing support for childcare providers, right, the classroom teachers, to be able to have their children in childcare, which is, a phenomenal thing that we needed to do that, but we did need to do that, and so we've done that. In the tax bill that was just signed into law, the legislature just enacted not too long ago, there's something called a Child Independent Tax Credit. It's currently $180 a year. That's going to go up to $310 in the next year. And then when it's fully rolled out, I've forgotten now the number off the cuff, but it's over $400 per year as a credit. And so, personally, I wish we could have done even more than that to help families make ends meet. That wasn't in the cards this time around. But that's a good chunk of change. It's a huge step, I think, in the right direction. So that's people are going to start seeing that coming back to them. I start
looking at food, gas. They're going all in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I recently even the price of formula, right, infant baby formula is nearly $100 a month, I think, maybe even more than that. And that is pricey, especially on top of diapers and onesies and wipes and all the other things. Babies are small humans, but they need a lot of stuff.
But that was remember when you first brought your baby home and you bought a box of diapers of 96 diapers.
Yeah.
And I said, my God, it's going to last forever.
Yeah, it lasts like 3 days.
And then as they got bigger, the box stayed the same size.
Right, but the quantity goes down.
It went to 48 to 24. It's
right. Well, the bodies grow. Yeah, they get bigger so fast.
You start looking at the money isn't going fast enough to keep up with the inflation.
Yeah, well, and that's why we, put these pieces into the tax bill, and we continue to have this conversation about how we can boost this sector, right? The sector almost went under in COVID. And so we clearly have some work to do. And we also have some work to do, and I believe we are doing it, on higher education, right? Access to higher education. And so actually in this year's budget, the fiscal 24 state budget, we've put in a pretty hefty amount of funding to support free tuition for community college for people who are 25 and older. And also for people who are going into a nursing program, because we're seeing a decline in the number of people who are going into nursing as a field and people working in nursing as a field. And so we wanted to highlight that and help to get people into we need nurses. Nurses are amazing, and so I'm glad that we were able to do those things as well.
I'm a little further on the cycle. When I went to school, Holy Cross, all in, $6,200 a year. And I was amazed at how my mother was making a whopping $11,000 as a drill press operator. My dad was making big bucks, $18,000. And I was amazed that they could come up with $6,000 a year.
Yeah. Now you can barely buy your textbooks for that.
$78,000 at these private schools.
It is incredible how much it costs.
And I finally got through it. My oldest got her PhD, so that's behind us.
Congratulations.
It's done. And then it hit me. I got 2 grandkids. I had to start putting money away for their school.
Yeah. It's a really significant equity-focused conversation, because without that kind of generational wealth that you're talking about, right? Without the support of your parents, without you, them supporting you, and then you supporting your kids, and in turn your grandkids, it makes college really, really difficult to access. And so these are, again, policy and funding conversations that we are having at the state and acting on to make college and higher education more affordable and accessible.
Well, it's amazing to me because you look at somebody who's making 50, 60 grand a year. Good salary. Not the millions they pay in the State House, but...
We definitely don't make millions in the State House.
No, I don't know how. It's got to be the passion of helping, because you could make more on almost half the jobs you list.
I think that's generally true. But, you know, people don't go into public service for the salary. You know, we go, at least for me, you know, I went into public service because I wanted to do good. And I believe that we have been able to achieve that, and we continue to work to do more good.
Well, again, just the 400 here, the little bit there.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like a life-changing event, but when you add up all the little bits,
It adds up.
you know, it's like I hear it where we want to forgive tuition. But what do you do with the new people who are taking on debt?
Yeah.
You know, it's nice to wipe out everything beforehand.
Right.
But
We
what
still
is
have a
it?
system problem.
Little Sally
right.
raises her hand and says, I got to come up with 70 grand this year.
Right, exactly. And it's just unaffordable for so many people. So, you know, that is something that we have taken several important first steps on, and I hope we'll be taking more steps in the years to come.
Think about it. When we graduated, I came out with $32.80 in my pocket. But it was my $32.80.
Yeah, but it's not debt, so that's...
I didn't owe anybody my $32.80.
Yeah, and I think it's a particularly salient conversation as we think about housing as well as an issue, because housing also is both wildly unaffordable, you know, deeply expensive, and also, you know, we don't have enough stock, right? We don't have enough smaller homes, starter homes, what some housing experts call the missing middle. I think it's one of the most predominant housing issues in our district, including right here in Milford, right? To be able to even build those homes, right? How do we generate and help to incentivize the building of those types of homes so that people can get into the housing market?
Well, Milford's 95% built out.
Right.
You know, and I saw a house, you know, when they announced what they sold for, $800,000.
Yeah, it's wild.
When I grew up, you could have bought Milford for $800,000. They would have thrown in Hopedale and Mendon. You know, I don't understand how these kids. When I started, I had a $250 mortgage.
Yeah, wow, that sounds great.
Yeah, it does now.
Mine's a lot bigger than that.
You know, but you sit there and say, if you've got a couple $1,000s a month or $1,000 a month debt for your school loans,
Right.
and then you want to buy a house and the starter homes
Yeah.
are $500,000, that's a $3,000 mortgage.
Yeah, it is very expensive and, again, unattainable for a lot of people. So, you know, I hope we haven't yet taken up a housing policy bill. There are some provisions in the tax bill, now tax law, that reduce tax obligations for certain lower income individuals with regard to housing. There's also a big investment in housing development, the Housing Development Incentive Program, or called HDIP. So, you know, we are taking, again, first steps, but hopefully they are the first of many.
Well, we got to do something, because otherwise all our kids are going to be living in Nebraska.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the data shows that people are leaving. If people are leaving, they're leaving because of the high cost of living, right? The high cost of housing, the high cost of childcare.
It's hard to recruit. I mean, I can recruit people from the coasts to come work at the company.
Sure.
Either the left coast, you know, California,
Right,
Washington,
right.
Oregon, or the East Coast, all the way down to the Carolinas. But trying to get somebody out of the square states.
Well, it's just so much more expensive here.
You know, my
It's difficult.
brother-in-law got offered a wonderful position up here, and he lives in a 3,500 square foot house that cost him, as he said, almost $300,000. And he thought, well, I'd move to Massachusetts, it's going to be more expensive, it'll be like $400,000.
It's like triple.
He turned the job down.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if you can't afford
Because
to
he
live,
sat there and said, a house of, say, 4,000 square feet,
oh yeah,
there's no way they can make the salary.
no chance.
You know?
Yeah. And so I am certainly extremely well aware of this. It's one of the main things that I hear about from constituents and our partners in local government. And so I'm not actually on the housing committee, but I continue to work with my colleagues and you know, try to do more good things.
Well, you're doing, I mean, some of the things that I saw you're involved in, you don't even think about it, like changing stations. You know, until all of a sudden you've got a daughter with a diaper that needs changed.
Yeah. So this is a bill that I've filed that actually has garnered a favorable report several times now. So hope maybe this is the term where we get it all the way across the finish line. This bill would require at least semi-private, accessible diaper changing stations.
Clean.
For public buildings and public accommodations, if those buildings also offer a bathroom for people who don't need diapers. And so, I'll say, as again, I'm not so far out of the diaper stage as a parent. I'll tell you, when we did the initial work on this bill, I actually heard from a father who told me that one time he just couldn't find a place to change his daughter's diaper. And so he changed her diaper on top of a bar. Which I think we could probably all agree is not a great solution.
Probably there's some health statutes that would say that's not a good...
Not a great solution. I don't think the bar was open at the time, but, that's it's just actually not that hard, right? It's not that costly. It doesn't need to be in a bathroom per se, right? So I've seen these where, you have sort of a side hallway where, a women's room and a men's room might be, and in the hallway itself is a changing station that folds down from the wall. And so it's sort of blocked from the main area of the building where most of the people are. So it is semi-private. But, irrespective of gender or physical ability, like there's a changing station that you can access.
But that's one time where the men are discriminated against because there's fewer changing stations in men's rooms.
I think
than ladies' rooms.
Yes, that is a true statement that. Yeah, I think if you're going to find one, you're more likely to find one in a women's room than a men's room.
And
and that sort
my
of continues.
My darling bride used to take my daughters when there was no changing station.
Right.
But when I'm by myself,
yeah, you got to.
It's not like I'm going in the ladies' room.
Yes, I think that's a good plan.
But
it also, I think, just kind of utterly fails to recognize the fact that child rearing and child care is just not only women's work anymore. And that's just not the reality. And so we need to, update things to reflect
No, I think we're past
more
the
equity.
idea of having men do this and women do that.
I sure hope so.
Well, you would hope. Especially when you start looking at salaries. I mean, a lot of people in Massachusetts can't live on one salary.
I think most people in Massachusetts can't live on one salary.
So...
And, we not only see a gender divide, but in particular, we also see a racial divide in salaries. And so I think we have a great amount of work to do on that. In fact, some wage equity legislation is moving through now, actually.
See, that's always been a hard one for me because I've been in the sales, the commercial side. Mm-hmm. There's only one color, green.
Yeah.
If you sell, if you make your numbers, it was never that you're going to pay an African-American, a Mexican, a Portuguese man less. It's here's your base salary, here's the numbers, you make your numbers, you do well.
Right, yep, well.
And that was, it was always something that you had to teach my daughters. Because my darling bride, she's smarter than me. She's so much better at everything than I am. But you had to teach them that you're going to run into dinosaurs. And when you do, outthink them, outwork them, run them over, but don't let anybody ever hold you down. Because if you do, then it's you.
Well, it's an important lesson to teach that that still not everyone is treated equally, and that those of us with marginalized identities are held to different standards.
But Becca, I don't understand how it doesn't affect, okay, I'm an old man and I'm got views against women. Well, wait a minute. Maybe I should think that, how do I want my daughters treated? And if I don't have daughters, my darling bride, well, I never got married. I never had kids. Did you have a mother? Most people do.
Indeed, that's how biology works.
So you sit there and say, putting somebody down because of their gender makes no sense to me.
Well, that's part of why I ran for the legislature. We still, in the Senate, we were already only at roughly a quarter members who were women. And then one person was just tapped by the Healy administration to take a position in the executive branch, working specifically with rural communities. And that election, that special election, is a race between two men. So whoever wins, it's certainly not going to be a woman because there's no woman in the race. So our numbers of women legislators are actually going down.
Really?
Yeah, which is a really interesting fact, especially for a place like Massachusetts. Right, Nevada, for example, has gender parity in their legislature, and Massachusetts has never broken 40%.
That's amazing to me because I'm not going to argue whether women are smart or better, but it's 50%. If you just say...
I think it's slightly over 50%, actually, that are just by population. But that's, it's also part of why I feel compelled to continue to serve on the board of the Massachusetts Caucus of Women Legislators. This is a bipartisan, bicameral group of women all of us serve in the legislature, in the House or the Senate, and and we work together, and we have been very successful in working together to achieve positive policy and funding results for the advancement of women in particular in the Commonwealth. We were talking about the budget earlier. In addition to my work on the Women's Caucus board, I secured $300,000 this year for a Massachusetts Women's History Center and a Women's Hall of Fame. And there's whole parts of our history that only happened because of women, and that history has never really been elevated. So I'm so proud to partner with the folks who are working in the nonprofit space to create these resources for people. And the plan is both online and in person, which is terrific, so that those stories and those histories can be elevated and learned and shared.
It's just, if you're running a company, if you're driving an organization, 50% of your labor pool is women.
Yeah, and we saw a pretty significant exodus of women from the workforce during right after the onset of COVID, because everybody was, people had to figure out how to take care of the kids, and also because everybody was home, and so we saw very starkly.
But is it even? I mean, when you think of my darling bride's making more money than I am, who's going to stay home? Well, that's an easy one.
It's, every family has to make their own choices. But statistically, we saw a significant number of women leave the workforce. And I did some work, some notable work to kind of help and support and boost women coming back into the workforce, after COVID started to subside a little bit.
Has it come back? Is it evened out?
It's a good question, actually, Al. I don't know the latest figures. But now that we're talking about it, I'm going to ask.
Well, but when I do job descriptions,
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say, if you're a woman, here's the set of criteria. If you're a man, here's the...
Sure.
It says, here's the job description, and I'm going to pay
Yep.
$80 to $100.
Yep.
I don't care if you're a man or a woman. Here's what I need done, and I'm willing to pay $80 to $100.
Well, it would be great if we were able to achieve that across the board. But, something that we continue to work on, along with a number of other issues that, mental health and funding for all sorts of different things here in Milford and throughout the district, and policy on climate change and plastics, all sorts of things that we are working on in the legislature.
One of the things we always said is, you're part of the state legislature, so immigration is not under you.
True.
You can't deport people to Rhode Island.
Nope.
So it's a federal thing. But now all of a sudden, it is having a big effect on us. Immigration and the number of people coming to Massachusetts.
Yeah. So Massachusetts, as you probably know, has an emergency assistance housing program for families. And this is a longstanding law that applies whether you've been here 10 minutes or 10 years. And we are seeing a significant increase in influx of people needing emergency housing. And the governor made an announcement today that we are nearing capacity in that system. It has been a significant challenge. We haven't seen that challenge come specifically to Milford, but I am seeing that challenge in a number of other communities. And, and we continue to look to our federal partners for additional funding and other resources to speed up the work authorization process so that people can actually get jobs, which is, what folks want to do. They want to work. I think the important thing to keep in mind also is that the EA system, this emergency assistance housing system, is also critically important for domestic violence survivors, right, and people who have a really serious and immediate need for shelter. And I'd like to think we can all agree that in fact everyone is better off. Everyone is better off when people have housing and shelter. And so, I continue to work on addressing homelessness as a policy matter, an ongoing policy matter, and in this particular issue, as it has come to a head over the last several weeks and now several months, actually. From a legislative perspective, we're not running the program, and we're not the folks on the ground either. So my job as a senator is to really do everything I can to ensure that my partners in local government and the administration have good lines of communication, and that the things that that our local partners need, that those needs are getting elevated to the administration, and that the administration is then addressing them, and then for whatever information the administration has, that it is in fact filtering down to our partners in local government, grassroots supports.
Well, the media confuses me more than clarifies things sometimes, because they talk about all these people coming here and why are they coming, and I think about it. I've been blessed that I have not had to worry about feeding my family.
Yeah.
I've not had to worry about having a blanket and a roof over their head.
Right.
But Becca, I don't know what I would do if I couldn't feed my family. For them to come. I mean, my grandfather came to Milford in '39 with $32.80 in his pocket.
Yeah.
And spent nothing, because every penny he earned that he could, he saved to ship back to Portugal.
Yeah.
For his 3 daughters and his wife to live a better life. Mm-hmm. So when I hear people coming to the country because they want a better life for their family, I have a hard time faulting them.
I mean, we are a nation of immigrants, as the saying goes. And, as nations go, we're still relatively young. I mean, almost everybody has a story of coming from elsewhere, right? And so, anyway, we continue to work on providing services,
people who
basic
come
supports.
here and break our laws, I have no sympathy for. People who come here to do drugs or deal drugs, I'd like to see them all just thrown out.
Well, I think the data shows that that's something of a farce, at least in Massachusetts.
And it's like 0.5%.
It's just not true that the majority.
No, it's not even a minority. It's a tiny
Right.
little amount.
Right.
And unfortunately, it seems like they prey upon their own communities more than anything else.
Well, that's I think part of why supports are important, and ensuring that this EA system and the conversations continue to function to the best of our ability. That we also provide Mass Health, right, which is our healthcare system for lower income individuals. And a variety of food supports, WIC and SNAP. Another thing from the budget, actually, that I secured this year is $150,000 for hygiene security, which is something I see you're surprised by this. The various benefit programs that we have in place now that help lower income people make sure they have food and supplies, like WIC and SNAP, don't cover toothbrushes, toothpaste, deodorant, shampoo, other hygiene products like that. So if you're a low-income person, how are you going to afford those
I
things?
thought we went
Soap.
decades ago through the feminine hygiene products that weren't available.
Yeah, that's even a subset, right, for period products. In fact, the Senate unanimously passed legislation last session to make period products available for free in schools and a couple of other places. Also, something that didn't ultimately make it over the finish line. But I hope that we will be taking that up again this term.
But again, what can that? I mean, of all the expenses.
It's wildly expensive to purchase those products, too.
But who would argue you don't need them?
You need them. You need them just like toilet paper.
I was saying, that's like saying, well, we're going to put a corn cob in the bathroom from now on because we can't afford toilet paper.
So, yeah, that wouldn't work very well, would it? So, anyway, I was able to secure $150,000. I partnered with a huge number of my colleagues in the Senate to lead on this and secure that funding. Again, in partnership with a number of nonprofits, but one in particular called Hope and Comfort that is really leading on this work throughout the state. Last year alone, they provided over 2 million hygiene products to people in need. And that's really significant, right? I mean, can you think about not being able to afford a bar of soap or a toothbrush, right? You need that. You need that for a whole host of reasons, including not just basic hygiene, but also mental health and self-confidence and self-worth.
Because if you're not brushing your teeth, you're going to run into dental problems.
Yeah, preventive health care. Good point.
You sit there and say, okay, toothbrush, and I'm probably dating myself, 99 cents.
Oh, yeah, they're a bit more than that now.
Okay, even if it's $2, $3, $5 for a toothbrush.
Uh-huh.
Let's see, what is a root canal cost?
A lot more than $5, that's for sure.
So you sit there and say, this is just silliness.
Yeah. So, that's all work that we're doing, and we're doing it successfully to make sure that, that we're delivering for everybody.
I saw you working on improving voting access.
Mm-hmm.
I am totally ignorant of, I want to vote, and unfortunately, the last 2 elections we've had in Milford, 9%.
Yeah, that's pretty low.
It's horrible.
Yep.
But if I want to vote, I get in my little car or walk down to the Portuguese Club.
Yep.
There's 4 districts or 5 districts there. I pick my district. I vote.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have to make easier?
Yeah, a bunch of things, actually. As you know, we passed vote by mail as a policy in the midst of COVID. I'm really proud to have authored the Vote by Mail Act and contributed significantly to the pieces that actually made it over the finish line and are now law in the Commonwealth. There's a good bit of confusion, actually, about voting by mail because the way the law passed, you have to choose to vote. If you want to vote by mail, you have to choose it every single year rather than being able to just pick it and say, I'm going to vote by mail, and then having a ballot just show up for you in the mail every year by
I got to admit,
road.
I've become lazy in my old age. When I was working up in Salem, New Hampshire, it was an hour and a half ride home at night.
That's a long drive.
It was, and it was so much easier to call down to the town hall.
Yep.
Tell our town clerk, Amy, I'm going to be voting by mail.
Yeah.
Absentee ballot.
Yep.
And she'd say, you got to fill in the form of just once or all year.
Yep.
And I was done.
Yeah. But you had to have, for absentee, you have to actually be out of state. So let me give you a different example. I think we are probably both, I think many of your viewers are aware that our public transportation systems in Massachusetts leave a little bit to be desired, let's say, generously. I'll tell you, in a bunch of years back when I was living in Brookline, actually, and I was taking the T, in and out of Boston to go to work. And one time I almost missed being able to vote because the T just broke. And, you know, and I wasn't out of state. I would never have qualified for an absentee ballot. But the T busting on you is not a reason why you shouldn't be able to cast your ballot. So voting by mail opened up a whole world of opportunity for people to be able to vote and not worry about what happens if the T breaks
so now
down.
Explain to
right?
me. I can show up at my precinct,
Yep.
get a ballot, fill it in.
Mm-hmm.
I can vote, like I was in New Hampshire, so that's why I qualified. I was out of state.
Because you were out of state, yes.
I was in New Hampshire, so I could request
An absentee ballot.
absentee
Because
ballot.
you were actually absent from Massachusetts.
And now, what happens to the people who basically just want the convenience?
I mean, people saw the convenience, and also people, not just the convenience of not needing to go to the polls. And I should say, plenty of people still want, I actually personally, even though I wholeheartedly believe in and support voting by mail as an option for people, and it's something that plenty of states do. In fact, some states only have vote by mail. They don't have polls at all. Personally, I like going to the polls on election day. There's something very exciting about, you know, democracy in action. I think that's an exciting
you
day.
get to go there and everybody's telling you they're voting for you.
Yeah,
That's got to be
you know,
a good
that's an
thing.
added benefit. But, you know, that didn't happen until just a few years ago. I had a whole life of voting before that. So anyway, you know, there is a certain excitement about going to the polls on election day, but for people who maybe have mobility issues or access issues or driving issues or people who might get sick on the day of,
what are the
there's also
pluses and minuses that people feel like, I want to vote by mail?
I think part of it is, you know, specifically for our older adults and adults with disabilities, you know, physically getting to the polls can be a real obstacle. And then there's, of course, the transportation question, or just traffic, right? Forget the T or the commuter rail. Like, all you need to do is try to drive to work, and you know that traffic is a real beast.
But what's the
and
negative?
I also think there's something very powerful about being able to sit with your ballot and just kind of think about it with your ballot. And I've heard this from a number of people where, you know, they wanted to look something up about a particular candidate or a ballot question and get a little more information. That's not something that you can do standing at the polls, right? That's something you have to do in advance of going to the polls. Then you go in and fill in your circles.
That used to be my oldest daughter when my mother was with us.
Yeah.
If there was something controversial that she and I didn't agree on,
Uh-huh.
she would take Grandma to the polls. What a surprise.
So, you know, so there's, you know, making sure that people, plus now that people have signed up to vote by mail in a particular election, a lot of people
Just keep
fairly
doing it.
reasonably think that they're going to be able to just continue to vote by mail, but that's not actually true, right? And then their ballot doesn't show
No,
up.
but they have to call Amy once a year.
Because you got to sign up once a year. Exactly.
Fill in the forms.
Exactly. And so that, you know, that also creates a lot of headache and extra work for our clerks, right? Who are the absolute heroes of elections, right? They are the people who make elections function. And, you know, we don't need to make more work for them. I think they do enough already. So there are all of those pieces that, you know, I think support making an option to permanently opt in for voting by mail, which is a bill that I filed this term.
But then what's the downside? I mean,
I don't see one.
I'm listening to you, and I'm hearing all the reasons that voting by mail is okay.
Yeah. I don't see a good
Is
reason
there a-
not to do it.
Is there a fraud thing? Is there?
Nope, that's not a thing. that is just a junk talking point.
Well, I mean, I laughed because the last election, I looked and said, this fellow Trump is going to make this election the cleanest election we've ever had because he's calling everybody a crook. So if I'm in charge, if it was Secretary of State, whatever, I'm in charge of the election, and you're telling me that I'm going to screw it up, I'm going to go out of my way to make sure that everything is perfect.
Yeah, well, and we all know what happened next. But anyway, so that's, you know, making a permanent option, an option to permanently elect voting by mail. That's something that would improve voter access and would make voting easier for
So the
people
only
and
difference
also more
is
streamlined.
I don't have to call Amy every year.
Yep.
How do you know when I move?
You have to re-register. And
Okay.
also we have local census activity that happens every year.
Okay, so there's not a
So-
thing that a vote, a ballot could be being mailed to my house after I leave forever.
Yeah, that's not a thing either. You know, and you know, a complementary piece of legislation that I filed is to require an upgrade to our back end voting systems, which work and are secure, but the technology is a little bit old and needs some updating. So that is another piece. We want to make sure that those people who are voting by mail can actually get their ballots to a drop box, right? Deliver them, because sometimes the mail is slow. So some people, if you're really on it and you get your ballot, you fill it out and you mail it back,
Oh, the
no
people
problem.
who mail the night before.
If you mail it the night before, you run a risk of your ballot not being counted. So we want to make sure that you have a ballot drop box to get to. In a community like Milford or Needham, where I live, where we have, you know, let's say
You
in
can
Milford,
do a
I think.
drive-by. There's a box at the town hall.
Yeah, you can go to town hall and drop it off, and that ballot drop box is accessible 24/7, pretty much. That was not and has not been true in plenty of other municipalities. So, you know, one of the bills that I filed is to set a ratio of, you know, a minimum of at least one accessible ballot drop box for every 25,000 voters. So that's a piece of improving
access. Let me ask you a
access.
point-blank question. You
Yep.
hear about the games that are played to keep people from voting down south and out in the squares.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have that problem in Massachusetts?
Not that I am aware of directly. That doesn't mean it's not happening and I just don't know about it. But voter intimidation is a crime, and you shouldn't do it.
No, I know, but if it was happening, wouldn't we hear about it?
I'd have to defer to, you know, the
Yeah.
folks who are working in that space. I just don't know. I will say one other thing that I am working on, well, two other pieces with regard to voting. One is to make Election Day a holiday. So everybody has a day off, so you can actually, you got no problem of going to the polls because, hooray, Election Day is a holiday. And paid, and relatedly, for those people who maybe couldn't take an entire holiday day, to provide paid time off for voting, 2 hours of paid time off, so you can make sure to get to the polls. And then the other piece that I think is very, very significant and absolutely necessary is changing our primary election date. So Massachusetts and a couple of other states throughout New England have the last primary date in the entire country. The majority of states that hold traditional primaries like we do hold them in the late spring period, right? So late May or early June. And that is when we should hold our state primary also. And you can see that evidence of us needing to change that date and moving it earlier in the year by virtue of the fact that we've had to change the primary date by legislative order every single cycle for more than a decade, because the September date conflicts with a Jewish holiday or falls out on, the weekend of September 1st. And so that is a huge disadvantage for voting for anybody who rents, because so many leases turn over on September 1st. And I mean, that date, once we had to change it because we were actually it was so late that we were actually going to be out of compliance with federal election law if we had the date that's set in our statutory
I hadn't even thought about
books.
the high holidays, those 3 weeks that,
Yeah.
right in the middle of when you could be voting.
Right. So we need to change our terrible, horrible, no good, very bad primary date. And I'm very proud to champion that as well.
But I hate to say it, but who cares if you made it in May? What would the downside be?
It just change is hard, right? It's been this way for a really long time.
You move my cheese.
I will say my bill proposes to move the primary from the September date that it currently is set as in the statutory law to the second Tuesday in June, right? It's before people go away for the summer. And frankly, that's also a deterrent in voting in primaries, because as much as voters might be engaged or be able to find candidates, and talk with candidates before school lets out, before the summer hits, then people go, sort of check out during the summer. Some people go on vacation. Some people just kind of naturally, it's hot, check out. And then boom, all of a sudden school's starting and everybody's got to sort of get back, get your sort of feet underneath you.
If
and
you told
all
me
of a sudden,
it's September or it's May, June.
Right.
Who cares?
Yeah.
That 1 year is going to be a little hectic. Because I got to get used to it.
And you make the transition, right? Again, change is hard. Change can be hard.
But after that...
Yeah, then it's just, that's how we do it. Absolutely.
I saw you got involved with some health issues for post-pregnancy women.
Yes. We were talking a little bit about mental health care earlier. This is something that we have seen with a number of very significant tragedies, ensuring that people can access mental health care that is necessary after pregnancy. That certainly includes PPD, right, postpartum depression, and various other manifestations. But also include part of the conversation that we've been missing, which is part of why I wrote the bill the way I wrote the bill, is that pregnancies end in a variety of different ways. Sometimes they end with a baby, and
sometimes they don't.
And sometimes they don't. And the more I have worked in this space, the more I have heard of the mental anguish that people have gone through all by themselves after a miscarriage or a stillbirth or any other number of situations in which pregnancies end. And we don't necessarily have even access to, to a screening for mental health needs, let alone coverage, right? Cost coverage for that care. And so the bill that I filed on post-pregnancy mental health care would mandate coverage for that health care.
Wait a minute. You're telling me that somebody who's gone through this situation doesn't necessarily get mental health help?
Correct. Often, actually.
What kind of nonsense? I'm sorry, I shouldn't.
No, it is. It's. I appreciate that it is a surprising reality to you and to many others, but it is the reality.
You can't expect an old man like me to really understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I've never been pregnant. I don't intend on being pregnant.
I would be very surprised if you somehow managed to get pregnant, Al.
I just have to accept the fact that there are certain things that I'm not going to intimately understand.
Yeah.
But
look, hormones are real, right? I've been, I'm the mom of two. I have carried pregnancies to term. I appreciate what those hormones are like. It is.
Yeah, but that's stressful enough.
Yeah, let alone the sleep deprivation and all the rest of it. But here's the thing, right? Here's the thing, Al, that I really want to stress as part of this conversation, and also part of why the bill was phrased not as a postpartum depression insurance coverage, but as post-pregnancy, right? Regardless of however the pregnancy might have ended. The screenings that we have right now for postpartum depression happen at a pediatrician's office. So if you don't, think about it, right? If you have a baby, and you're taking the baby to the pediatrician.
If you went through the process and you have a baby.
Exactly. And you go to the pediatrician because you're taking your infant to the. Exactly, right? So if you're taking your infant to the pediatrician, which happens a lot, right? With newborns, you're going to the pediatrician a whole lot. It makes sense for those screenings to happen in those locations. But what about the people who have had a miscarriage or a stillbirth or have, any other number of circumstances where a pregnancy has ended? It can. Yeah.
And again, I can't understand it fully. I just have to.
And each person's needs are different. And so, however people come to having a mental health need after a pregnancy, we want to make sure that people can access and pay for that care and not have to make a choice between paying for that care and paying for food or paying for rent or heat or anything else that people need to pay for on a routine basis.
I mean, I guess I learn things when we talk.
I am so glad for that, Al.
Because it just stuns me to say, why would I even consider not covering that?
Yeah. Because for a really long time, behavioral health and mental health was hidden and shamed for a long time. And with deep gratitude to the Senate President, Senate President Karen Spilka, who has really led and championed on this in such brave ways. We have done a lot of work in the state in the last several years to combat and fight that stigma of needing mental health supports and really bringing it into the foreground and doing some deep policy and funding work on it.
It, again, stuns me. We have a woman governor. We have a woman
That's
president.
new, right? She's been there not quite a year yet.
It's been a year.
Almost a year.
You'd think that we're making progress.
We
learning.
are making progress. We are making progress. And in fact, one of the pieces specifically in the mental health space on which we have made significant progress is something that I am thrilled that we have. I'm also sad that we need it, but thrilled that we have it, which is something called Hey Sam. And back in 2021, I had a youth town hall virtually, of course, partly because young people can't drive, right? And 14, 15-year-olds, they can't drive yet. And also because it was still in, peak time for COVID. And so most meetings were still happening virtually. And so my staff and I held a virtual town hall for young people all throughout the district. And though not in so many words, they spoke very clearly and very courageously about how they needed different and better mental health supports. And so my staff and I got to work immediately. And within 3 weeks, we had secured $250,000 in state funding to launch a pilot program for a youth mental health text line. Because when young people need mental health care, you got to meet them where they are. And where they are is on their phones. Yeah. And so we partnered with Samaritans, Inc., which is an amazing, wonderful mental health support, suicide prevention nonprofit organization in our state. And we partnered with them, and within a matter of just a few months, they launched the text line. It is peer-to-peer. It is completely anonymous. It is completely confidential, and it is totally free. And so we secured that pilot funding in fiscal 22, and then in fiscal 23 it was so successful that we provided a full $1 million of funding for the Hey Sam Youth Mental Health text line. You can just text Hey Sam from your phone, and again it's peer-to-peer, which is such an important distinction from 988, which is a national mental health support line and suicide prevention line. But that can be staffed by, first of all, it's staffed by adults, and they can be anywhere in the country. But Hey Sam is staffed by other young people, trained, of course, and supervised young people right here in Massachusetts.
But they can relate better.
Exactly, because they know what it's like to be a young person in today's world.
Are.
Because they are, right? You and I don't know what it's like to be a young person in today's world.
I don't.
Well, so I appreciate that. But also, social media didn't exist when I was that age. It is a different world now.
Well, I do thank you, not just for the earmarks, because those really help.
Yes, I'm so looking forward to that new audio system in town hall.
We'll be able to hear each other in town hall.
That'll be so good.
And on a more critical note, Chris's Corner will be able to help more people.
Yeah.
So I thank you for taking care of Milford, but I really thank you for taking care of everybody in the district.
My pleasure and privilege, Al. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
So thank you to the 6 loyal viewers. It's hard to understand things you don't understand. I mean, some of the women's issues that are being brought out, Becca understands them. She's lived them. I haven't. But you have to stay open and respect that we'll never quite understand them to the level, but we should support them. Some of the immigrant issues, all the others. I hope we never are in a position where we can't feed our families, clothe our families, have a roof over their heads. But we have to respect the fact that there are people who do. And as always, thank you for joining. May God bless. May tomorrow be a better night than tonight.
Not too long since I've been home. Been running all my life just searching for my soul.